might as well get started. It's 4:05. Time for some Civil War trivia. I don't know if any of you would recognize the two generals sitting on the screen right now, but I figured I'd use them to test if the float-in is going to work. They have a common date of September 14th, 1862. The place was South Mountain, and specifically Fox's Gap. The gentleman on the left, the Union general, we had a presentation on him several years ago. And he was in the class of 1846, which included people such like George McClellan, Thomas Jonathan Jackson. Its anchorman, or I guess I don't know what they call it, that's the Naval Academy's term, was George Pickett. And his name was Jesse Reno.
Oh.
He was
okay. I'm 0 for 1. Go ahead.
Okay. Second man, again, both of these gentlemen, unfortunately, were died or killed in action at Fox's Gap. Reno, at the end of the day, Samuel Garland, at the beginning of the day. He was considered, as was Reno, one of the up-and-coming generals in the Confederate Army. So let's get right to it. Welcome to today's time for some Civil War trivia. There'll be 8 trivia categories, such as Grant, generally speaking, potpourri. Number of questions for each category range from 8 to 19. I don't think we'll get through all of them. Using PowerPoint, your trivia will present it on the screen as a statement concerning the war, personality, event, battle, etc. Once reading the trivia statement is completed, please respond verbally if you know the answer or would like to call out a guest. Make sure that you are not muted. Once the correct answer is given or no one provides a correct answer, it will be revealed on the screen. We will go for the scheduled time and save the trivia not covered at a later time for some trivia session, assuming that you or we are in favor of additional sessions. So let's get ready for some fun, and it's time for Civil War trivia. Categories today: test questions, Grant, legal perspective. Those two were selected because our first 2 sessions this year were on Grant, and we just had the legal perspective. Generally speaking, is basically quotations from generals in the war. Civil War cavalry, self-explanatory. USMA classes of 1861 in the Battle of Gettysburg. That was an interesting subject I came across, and hopefully it'll be interesting to you. We have a potpourri A. If we have time, we have the Irish in the Civil War. And the last one with the most questions is the British in the Civil War. So some test questions. January 26, 2023, we had an excellent presentation by Dr. Heidi Amelia Ann Weber on Grant's concept of leadership in taking, I can read it from here, that secured silo. All right, hold on a second. All right. The following are some trivia on the Battle of Shiloh to demonstrate how tonight's trivia program will be presented. First one is, this then Lieutenant Colonel was Chief of Engineers for the Army of Tennessee, ranked first in the class of 1853 at the United States Military Academy. General Grant said of him, he will go all the way. In other words, he would command the entire army. General Sherman said of him, if he lives, he'll outdistance Grant and myself. Unfortunately, that would not be the case. Anyone want to guess who it was? Well, it was James Bird-Eye McPherson, who was killed at the Battle of Atlanta. And there he was. There he is in all his glory.
Didn't Sherman cry over that?
His body was brought back to Sherman, and he actually cried over it. He was very sad that McPherson was killed. And it was unfortunate. He was trying to escape from rebel soldiers, and he was basically shot in the back as he rode away. Number 2, this Irish-born Confederate Brigadier General commanded the 2nd Brigade of Major General William Hardee's 3rd Army Corps of the Army of Tennessee, not of thus Tennessee, but of Tennessee. This brigade attacked Sherman's positions on the first day of Shiloh. They would meet again at the Battle of Chattanooga, with Sherman attacking his position at Tunnel Hill.
Cleburne.
And, pardon me?
Cleburne?
You got it. Patrick Conan Cleburne. He is, and again, handsome devil with his beard and mustache and all having. Third question is, the battlefield at Shiloh and has these same features, landmarks that would reoccur at later battlefields, namely Antietam and Gettysburg. And Antietam, well, that would be the sunken road. They were in both Shiloh and at Gettysburg. Second one was the peach orchard. And here is the sunken road. I took this picture when I was there years ago. The Union attacked from the left towards the right. That's the tower. We might see that a little bit later in the presentation. And that's the sunken road down at Shiloh. So our first category is Grant. And here we go. This U.S. congressman was responsible for changing Grant's name from Hiram Ulysses to Ulysses Simpson, Grant's mother's maiden name, by incorrectly utilizing the changed name in the appointment documentation for the United States Military Academy. Anyone remember who he was? He was in Chernow's book.
Washburn.
Marshburn?
Nope.
Nope.
No.
Thomas Hamer.
Oh, boy, no.
Ooh.
Oh, boy, that's a hard one.
He was the best man.
I
at
couldn't,
Grant-
I apologize, but I couldn't hear the name.
Thomas
the-
Hamer.
Hamer, okay.
He was the best man at Grant's wedding to Julia Dent.
I thought that was the Confederate general,
Longstreet.
You got it.
Longstreet.
There he
Oh,
is.
oh, oh, I
There
thought you were
he
saying,
is. James Longstreet, class
Oh,
of
I thought-
1842. This seven-letter
Okay.
word beginning with a B was the action taken by the Grant family with respect to the Ulysses wedding to Julia Dent, whose family owned slaves. This is like a Jeopardy question answer. Begins with a B with 7 letters, and it is boycott.
Really?
Yes. And again, that's from Chernow. In April 1854, the addressee to whom Grant sent his resignation was this future Confederate general. It was accepted by this future Confederate official.
Davis, the official?
He was the official.
Yes.
Johnson.
And the general was New Jersey born, so but that won't help very much. He's not very well known. But he was Samuel Cooper, who became the first ranking general in the Confederate Army. His commission was signed before Albert Sidney Johnston. And there was accepted by Secretary of War Jefferson Davis. Both men attended the military academy. Grant was one of the 9 Union generals who called Galena, Illinois, population 15,000 as of the 1860 census, and it's now about 3,000. I'm sorry, I'll be right with you in a second. Yeah, 3808 as of 2020 census. The other 8 are. The first 2 are known. The last 6 are, if you know them, you know Galena. By the way, what is Galena? That's the ore from which lead is extracted. So apparently the lead industry was very big in the Galena area at that time. So let's go through who was the first one. Who was Grant's, shall we say, chaperone throughout the war? He became Secretary of War, but died shortly thereafter. Name John Rawlins.
Right.
Second one was at the surrender at Appomattox. He wrote down the terms that were dictated after Grant wrote them up in his book. Seneca Indian Chief, L.A. Parker. Yep, L.A. Parker. I can't
We had a
believe
lecture on him too.
Third answer was Jasper Alamo Maltby. He was a Mexican War veteran. He wounded at Vicksburg, stayed in Vicksburg, was with the Army of the Tennessee. He was in the Atlantic campaign, remained in Vicksburg, served as military mayor of Vicksburg, but he died shortly after he achieved that position. Augustus Chetlain, said to be the first Union volunteer from Illinois, became captain of the 12th Illinois and was elected lieutenant colonel. Battle experience with Grant at Paducah, Fort Donelson, Shiloh, command at Corinth, assigned to task of raising and training a force of black troops. After the war, became banker and consul to Belgium. So the Grant connection helped. He was a brevet major general. Next one, John Oliver Dewar, 45th Illinois Volunteers. Fort Donelson, Shiloh, Vicksburg, led the 1st Regiment into Vicksburg. After the war, went into banking and mercantile business. He was a brigadier general. William Reuben Rowley, another 45th Illinois Volunteers. He was at Fort Donelson, Shiloh, Vicksburg, went east with Grant, military secretary, but illness after wilderness campaign resulted in his resignation. He served in the county clerk and Davis of Davies County in Illinois. And another one is John Corson Smith, 74th Illinois volunteer. He served at Chickamauga, Kennesaw Mountain, where he was seriously wounded. Later, he was the Illinois treasurer and lieutenant governor. Then there was John, I'm sorry. And the other Smith brothers, I call him, John Eugene Smith, 45th Illinois Volunteers, Fort Henry, Fort Donelson, Shiloh, Vicksburg Campaign, March to the Sea, Carolinas, remained in the Army after the war. And again, this is something where I came across it in one of the books that, Civil War trivia, but they only had 2 of the generals. If you go, there is a website in Galena covering these 9 generals, and every year they have a celebration. In his personal memoirs, Grant wrote of this general, his dispositions were deliberately made and always good. He could not be driven from a point that he had given to hold. I do not believe he could ever have conducted Sherman's army from Chattanooga to Atlanta against the defenses and commander guarding that line in 1864. On the other hand, if he had been given to him to hold the line that Johnston tried to hold, neither that general nor Sherman nor any other officer could have done better. This one surprised me too, but I'm not surprised. He was going to be removed in command at Nashville before he defeated Hood at Nashville. Head of the Cumberland Army, Major General George Thomas.
He said.
Okay. This general said of Grant, as a gentleman and as an organizer of victorious war, he excelled all your most noted soldiers. Later during the 1868 presidential campaign, when someone spoke scathingly of Grant, he said, "Sir, if you ever again presume to speak disrespectfully of General Grant, either you or I will sever his connection to this university." That should be fairly simple. Who became a university president after the war?
Chamberlain?
Robert E. Lee.
Howard.
No, he got it.
But Robert E. Lee was the gentleman here, and this is from a book, Flood, the Final Years. I came across that talking to someone on the telephone, and I said, "You know any good books on the Civil War?" And he mentioned this, and Flood's book was an excellent source of his time from Appomattox to when he finally passed away at Washington College. To Calum Lincoln, Grant said of this general, "There is no danger, but he would strike bottom on salt water someplace. That I would not feel the same security. In fact, I would not have entrusted this expedition to any other living commander." Okay, no takers. William Tecumseh Sherman, again from Chernow. Next question. In December 1862, this civilian was taken prisoner in Holly Springs, Mississippi. When informed of the situation, it was rumored that Brigadier General Nathan Bedford Forrest said to pass the civilian through the lines and waste no time. This one was a surprise to me, but here we go. Julia Grant.
Oh,
Really?
Yes. After the war, this Confederate general concluded that Grant's movement away from Cold Harbor, crossing the
Wait a minute, go back to them. What was you doing in Mississippi?
Remember, he was down in that area during that time. That was the lead up to, he was in that area, after Donelson. And I'm going, this is what he was getting ready for the taking of Vicksburg. That was when he was going up and down the river and all that. So it wasn't uncommon for wives of generals to visit their thing. And like I said, when I came across this in Civil War Curiosity, I'd say, I can't believe it, but it was there. So here it is. And I can see them passing her through without a problem. They were still gentlemanly at that time during the war.
Are you going to give this quiz to us by email or something so we have the answers and can think about it? Because I'm a little under the weather and I want to think about it.
Yeah, I mentioned before you got on. It's going to be on Zoom. Yeah. So when I get it, I'll send you the link.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Okay.
Thank you, Rich.
Okay. After the war, this Confederate general concluded that Grant's movement away from Cold Harbor, something we're studying right now in, what's it, the last book by Shara, crossing the James coupled with the creek. Okay, whoops, pardon me, let me start again. After the war, this Confederate general concluded that Grant's movement away from Cold Harbor, crossing the James coupled with the Confederate inertia, was the war's final turning point. Thus, the last chance of Confederate success were not lost in the repulse at Gettysburg, nor in any combat of arms. They were lost during the 3 days of lying in camp, believing Grant was hemmed in by the broad part of the James below City Point and had nowhere to go but to attack us.
Longstreet.
Well, he served under Longstreet.
Hmm.
E. Porter Alexander, the head of
Oh.
Longstreet's
Artillery.
artillery.
Yeah.
Now here we go into some legal perspective. Again, this was sort of gauged towards the second one. And anyone recognize these two? The one gentleman on the left, everyone should know who that is. And the one, I mean, on the right, the one on the, the one on the left,
Annie.
right away. Yeah. Well, the first one's Attorney General Bates.
Oh,
And of course, that's Roger B. Taney. Taney or time. I don't know how, when I learned it, anyway, during World War II, and this came across a book that Rich had said to read involving J. Edgar Hoover. During World War II, this Supreme Court decision from 1866 was cited by the defense attorneys to support the position that 8 German saboteurs, 2 who were American citizens, who landed in Long Island, Florida, should be tried in a civilian court and not a military tribunal. Under this decision, trying citizens in military courts is constitutional only when there is no power left but the military. Tribunals can only be utilized if civilian courts are not in operation. The court's 1942 decision in ex parte querin was defendants lost to the fact that the saboteurs were unlawful combatants subject to trial and punishment by military tribunals. This 1966 case was
Milligan?
That's Milligan. And Milligan was part of a bunch of, I think he was probably a Copperhead, but he could have also been a Son of Liberty. But they had planned to free Confederate prisoners from Camp
Johnson's
Douglas.
Island.
Yeah. And to arm them and start an insurrection.
The
And Milligan,
Northwest Conspiracy.
yep. And the funny thing about it, or not the funny thing about it, Jefferson Davis thought there were thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in the Midwest that were just like Milligan. So, but the fact of the matter is that through his Jacob Hoffman, he had sent operatives to Chicago, and they were supposed to be joined by armed folks like Milligan. Nobody showed up. So it was one of those type of things where they called for an action and nobody showed up and were embarrassed by it. So fortunately, that didn't develop into an insurrection. Next one, he declared that it was his intention that the 8 Lincoln assassination conspirators, David Harold, George Atherton, Lewis Powell, Mary Surratt, Dr. Samuel Mudd, Samuel Arnold, Michael McLaughlin, and Edward Spangler should be tried and executed before Lincoln was buried.
Ulysses S. Grant?
No, Johnson.
No?
Stanton,
Stanton.
Stanton.
Yep. He was, you look at his Lincoln's cabinet, and it was a whole cast of lawyers there, including Lincoln. Lincoln assassination conspirators were tried by a military commission rather than a civilian court, which gave the prosecution these advantages. And
No trial by jury.
Yeah, no trial by.
yeah. Let's see what it says. Conviction only required a simple majority, and a 2/3 majority could impose the death penalty. There was one other conspirator, Mary Surratt's son John, who fled the country, but 18 months after his mother was executed, was captured. Unlike the other conspirators, he was tried in a civilian court in Maryland and had the following outcomes.
There was a hung jury.
He's acquitted.
Yep, it was a hung jury, 8-4 for acquittal.
Yeah, it was on hung jury. Yeah.
Yeah. Most of the charges had expired due to statute of limitations. With respect to the murder, mistrial. Supreme Court decision was related to the Northern Blockade, which resulted in the capture of dozens of American and foreign ships. The plaintiff's position was based on the amnesty law. If there was a declared war, the ship so captured could be kept as a prize. If no declared war, the seizure and impounding a ship would be piracy. The court held in a 5-4 decision, which, by the way, was delayed until Lincoln could put a more favorable member of the court up, that the firing on Fort Sumter, the Southern states and Confederacy were an insurrection and at war against the United States. As noted in the opinion, the Civil War was a war, whether declared or not, and it is not necessary to constitute war that both parties should be acknowledged as independent nations or sovereign states. Therefore, President Lincoln had the authority, even though there was no formal declaration of war, to order a blockade and impound ship. Note, Chief Justice Roger Taney dissented. Its case was called, and that word it was called the prize cases.
Oh, yeah.
The Supreme Court decision dealt with the transfer of bonds, and this one came up in the presentation that they made, from a state that had seceded. In its ruling, the court concluded that secession was unconstitutional since the Constitution did not allow states to unilaterally secede. Therefore, the ordinance of secession and all actions taken by the legislatures with succeeding states were null. The transfer sale of the bonds were also null. And this was Texas versus White. And the opinion was written by Chief Justice Salmon P. Chase. The $10 million United States bonds in dispute in Texas versus White were considered of said establishment of boundaries, cession of claim to territory, relinquishment of claim, and part of these legislative acts, which we covered in a previous book club meeting. This was a payment made to Texas for giving up claim to territories in New Mexico, the Compromise of 1850. In 1862, Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus as a war measure. First, at any point or in the vicinity of any of the military line between the city of Philadelphia and the city of Washington. Yep. But later, through the United States, Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Roger, was it Taney or Tommy? I never ruled that the president had exceeded his power as only Congress should do so. Lincoln considered arresting the Chief Justice, but instead ignored him. In 1863, Congress did empower Lincoln to suspend writ during the present rebellion. Lincoln's approach is like the approach of Andrew Jackson followed in Worcester versus Georgia, 1832, a case where the Supreme Court ordered the release of Samuel Worcester and several others when he went to live on a Cherokee reservation in Georgia without state of Georgia's permission, a crime under Georgia law. The court's decision was related to the fact that the relationship between Native American nations and the United States is as nations. Therefore, the state law was invalid. The state refused to release Worcester. And when he was informed of this, according to Horace Greeley, President Jackson said, well, John Marshall has made this decision, let him enforce it. Lincoln and Jackson's noncompliance could be also called this. And this is one that I got from the Amicia book. That's called non-acquiescence. Franklin D. Roosevelt was not the first president to try to expand or pack the Supreme Court with justice that would likely favor his causes. The prizes case, noted previously, were scheduled to be heard in March of 1862. The case was deferred until David Davis, a close friend of the President Lincoln, as well as 2 other nominees, were able to join the court and participate in the deliberations. The result was a 5-4 decision that supported the legality of blockade and Lincoln's action. During the delay, Lincoln nominated, and the Senate confirmed this former Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court as the 10th member of the Supreme Court. He was seated after the prize decision, and then he packed the court. It gave Lincoln one more. By the way, Congress did approve the expansion from 9 to 10 at this time. And his name was Stephen J. Field. And just to show you that this did happen, that's the court with all 10 members. Field is this gentleman right here at the far side of the court. He stayed on the court for quite a while. And now, for some generally speaking, If you can see, the two generals we have up there are Stonewall Jackson and William Tecumseh Sherman. And let's get right to it. On April 13th, 1861, when asked to speak at a meeting, this future general said, "The time for war has not yet come, but it will come, and that soon. And when it does come, my advice is to draw the sword and throw away the scabbard." Who said that?
Jackson.
You
Jackson.
got it. That was in Rebel Yell. Leading a charge to recapture a federal battery, he shouted, "Don't flinch, boys. They're shooting at me, not you." At Williamsburg, he shouted, "I am a one-armed Jersey son of a gun. Follow me."
Kearney.
You got it. Philip Kearney. Heck of a man. He got his training in Europe as opposed to anywhere in the United States, and I think had some foreign decorations. So very interesting man, very wealthy person who really wanted to be an attorney. At a meeting in the Southern Historical Society, he was asked about the defeat at Gettysburg. The question asked was, "You were there. Why did we lose the battle?" To which he replied, "I always thought the Yankees had something to do with it."
Longstreet.
Close, but no cigar.
Who?
It was George Pickett.
Oh,
Yes, here we go. When the South Carolina seceded, he wrote his brother, "You politicians have got things in a hell of a mess, and you may get them out as best you can. I'm going to St. Louis and take care of the family and have nothing more to do with it." Any guesses? Well, Uncle Billy. When he was asked about the qualifications of the division commander, Major John Bell Hood, he said, "Hood is a bold fighter. I am doubtful as to other qualities necessary."
Lost.
R.E. Lee. During the Atlanta campaign, when talking about these residents of the Confederacy, Major General William Tecumseh Sherman said, "I doubt if history affords a parallel to the deep and bitter enmity of this group. No one who sees them or hears them but must feel the intensity of their hate." Who is he talking about? The women of the South. This is from the Civil War. And I can imagine that's probably a true statement. This brief discussion occurred shortly after the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. As he approached, he was greeted warmly, and then his host said, "But what are you doing with all that gray in your beard?" In answer, his guest said, "You have to answer for most of it."
was that Lee?
Well, the host was really, the guest was George Meade. And if you remember, Meade got quite, that was an that I could see happening because there was after the surrender, they did have that interchange.
No, I disagree with this. Meade was not at Appomattox. Oh, unless it was after.
It was after. I said,
okay.
Shortly after the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. Yep.
But he wasn't at the surrender.
Yeah. This one should be an easy one. The Medal of Honor recipient, Professor Governor, was wounded 6 times and quoted saying, "I am not of Virginia's blood, she is of mine."
Who?
Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain.
Yeah.
When informed of the manner of death of the Union General Philip Kearny at Chantilly, this Confederate general warned, "Poor Kearny, he deserved a better death than that." And that was A.P. Hill.
Are you speaking into your microphone?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very loud.
All right, maybe because I'm getting a cold. Sorry.
That's okay.
No. Very loud.
Trying to project, so anyway.
No, it's good.
In a private moment, he said, "Lee was a good man, a fair commander who had everything in his favor." In 1879, he added, "He was a man who needed sunshine. He was supported by the unanimous voice of the South. Everything he did was right. He was treated like a demigod." Who said that about Lee? Well, it was Ulysses. And that's again from Chernow. It's amazing sometimes you look later in the book, you've come across those things. All right. During the Atlanta campaign, after his 20th Corps was held against an assault by the Confederates, led by General John Bell Hood, his headquarters was visited by 2 superior officers. He commented that his corps had performed well despite heavy losses. To this, his superior replied, "Oh, most of them will be back in a day or two." Sort of like a little insult there, wouldn't you say? And the corps, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get that on the screen. The corps commander was Joseph Hooker, and he did not like Hooker, William Tecumseh Sherman. There's a scene when, after McPherson was killed, Lincoln wanted to put Hooker in charge of the Army of the Tennessee. Sherman said Howard and would resign if he didn't get that promotion. Now let's talk about a little about Civil War cavalry, and the cavalry people I picked were Phil Sheridan and his staff, and he had quite a crew there, and of course Nathan Bedford Forrest. He was trained as a lawyer and began his service as a scout for the Confederacy. Of small stature, he was a bold fighter. Captured on one of the scouting missions, he was in the process of being exchanged. He was transported down the Potomac and up the James River. He noticed that the troops and supplies were being ferried up the river, and through careful questioning, found out that the troops were being destined for General Pope. Once he was free on August 5th, 1862, he walked 12 miles to Richmond and went to Lee's headquarters. Lee recognized his name, which was mentioned in Lee's general orders. The information provided led to Lee strengthening forces facing Pope at Second Bull Run. Known for his frequent raids in northern Virginia, Loudoun and Fairfax and Fauquier counties were known as his Confederacy. One of the most famous raids involved his capture of General Edwin Stanton, United States Military Academy, 1859, asleep in his bed. Apparently, he whacked him on the backside to wake him up. He also captured 58 horses. When President Lincoln heard about the raid, he lamented, I can make new brigadier generals. I can't make horses."
John Singleton Mosby.
Yeah.
You got it. And this one should be an easy one too. He graduated ranked 13th in the class of 46 from the U.S. Military Academy class of 1854. He was classmate of Lee's son Custis. General Joseph E. Johnson described him as a rare man, wonderfully endowed by nature with the qualities necessary for an officer of light cavalry. His headquarter camp was noted for its gaiety, included a banjo player. He was one officer whose physical appearance improved by growing a mustache and a full beard. Noted for his daring, he rode around McClellan's army during the Peninsula Campaign, but was out of communication with General Lee during the early part of the
Jeb Stuart.
Jeb
You got
Stuart.
it. Yeah, that thing about his nickname at the academy was Butte or Beauty, and he had a very his chin was not very prominent. He looked much better with a full beard mustache. Jeb Stuart married Flora, the daughter of the colonel and commander of the 2nd U.S. Dragoons. Despite being born in Virginia, his now father-in-law remained in the Union cavalry. Stuart stated that this was a decision his father would regret but once, and that would be continually. In addition to his son-in-law was a Confederate general, his son was also a Confederate brigadier general of infantry in the Army in Northern Virginia. Anyone remember his name? That was Major General Philip J. George Cook. You can imagine that. Your son-in-law is that. Here's an interesting one I came across in a book called The Cavaliers. On June 14, 1863, Lieutenant A. Willis Gould, rebuked for losing 2 cannons, shot this famous Confederate cavalry officer. As the doctor probed for the bullet and told that it may be mortal, the general said, "No damn man shall kill me and live." At the time of his shooting, the general was only armed with a pocket knife, which he used to stab Gould in the abdomen. The general grabbed a gun, set out to find his attacker. He found Gould, who had collapsed due to loss of blood. He then summoned the doctor and told him, "Spare nothing to save him, and when I give an order like that, I mean it." Gould died, but the general lived and continued to be a menace to the Union Army. The Wizard of the Saddle, Bedford Forrest. Can you imagine that being shot by born in New Jersey. Oh my goodness, we got a New Jersey guy. He began his war service in the East. However, after a failed Richmond raid, he was sent west to the Army of the Cumberland in charge of Cavalry Division. This division was part of the cavalry screen for Sherman's March to the Sea In March of 1865, as Sherman's army was marching through North Carolina in pursuit of Confederate army under General Joseph Johnston, his troops were again providing a screen. Confederate cavalry under General Wade Hampton and Joe Wheeler were looking for an opportunity to attack the screening cavalry. They attacked the Union camp at dawn, and it was a complete surprise. Sleeping in a farmhouse, he heard his name called out by the rampaging rebel soldiers. Fearing the same fate as Edwin Stanton mentioned above had with John Singleton Mosby, he fled the farmhouse without putting on either his jacket or mere trousers. He mounted a black horse. Pardon me?
Nothing. No.
I'm sorry. Dressed only in his night clothes. He was able to rally his troops and avoided the rout. This Smalling was known as the Battle of his pants or his Churchill skedaddle. I'm sorry, you said who?
Sheridan?
No, Sheridan. This was he was known as Kill Cavalry.
Kilpatrick.
Born in Sussex. My goodness gracious, a New Jersey guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, if you don't know, there's on 613 out of Sussex, there's the sign for his big reunion after the war. Like 20,000 people showed up.
Well, we'll see him again. Prior to the Battle of Wilderness, these two generals, one from the cavalry and one commanding the army in the field, had a confrontation. Both were noted for their fiery tempers. Two cavalry divisions had been sent out towards Spotsylvania. At Todd's Tavern, the division became entangled with infantry. The general ordered Torbert's and Gregg's cavalry divisions to use a different route. These two divisions were to support Wilson's division at Spotsylvania. Wilson's division was attacked by superior Confederate force and suffered heavy losses. The cavalry commander confronted the army commander and told him that he had broken up my combinations, exposed Wilson's division to disaster. Continuing the discussion, the cavalry general stated, I could whip Stuart if he would only let me. But since he insisted on giving the cavalry directions without consulting or even notifying me, he could henceforth command the cavalry corps himself. I would not give another order. He said he was resigning and left. The army general complained to his superior about the confrontation. The superior said, did he say that? Well, he usually knows what he's talking about. Let him go ahead and do it. That three should be easy from
Grant and me.
Well, it was the cavalry commander was Sheridan.
Yeah, well, he got their thing. That's what I was going to say, Master.
Yeah. Army commander was Meade, and of course there was Lieutenant. I can see that being an interesting discussion. Another cavalry commander confrontation, this time in the commander's tent. The cavalry commander strode into the tent, rushed aside the commander's extended hand. The following are the portions of the barrage that followed. You robbed me of my command in Kentucky, men whom I armed and equipped. You drove me into West Tennessee in the winter of 1862 with the 2nd Brigade I had organized and equipped without thanks from you or the government. You have taken away from me. I have stood your meanness as long as I intend to. If you ever try to interfere with me or cross my path, it will be at the peril of your life. Prior to this meeting, he had been informed that he was to report to another cavalry officer whom he detested. And I wonder who that was. He is a colorful character. Cavalry commander was Nathan Bedford Forrest, coming in and slapping the guy's hand away. And who was the commander? Probably one of the most disliked commanders of an army in the war.
Rick.
Ransom Bragg, yep. And of course, his new commander, who he didn't care for, was Joe Wheeler. And this was from Carter, Last Cavaliers. This battle is considered the bloodiest and largest all-cavalry battle of the war. It featured a Union cavalry force of 9,046 under General
Randy
Phillips.
Station.
Close but no cigar. Randy Station was not in, whoops.
Read that thing anyhow. Let him read it. Let him read it.
Okay. Against the Confederate cavalry of 66,000 under command of Major Generals Wade Hampton and Fitzhugh Lee, nephew of Robert E. Lee. The objective of Sheridan's raid was the destruction of a portion of Virginia Central Railroad and also provided diversion to Grant's planned crossing of the James River, mentioned before. Another objective was to have Sheridan's force link up with Major General David Hunter at Charlottesville. The Confederates had a spy in the Union headquarters who alerted them about the raid. The most interesting occurrence was the capture of unguarded Confederate supplies and spare horses by Brigadier General George Armstrong Custer. Custer attempted to escape with the captured material, but was soon surrounded by Confederate cavalry, the situation he would face in the future with a different adversary at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Fortunately, on this occasion, Sheridan became aware of Custer's predicament and sent forces to rescue him from what historian Eric J. Wittenberg called Custer's first last stand. Union casualties were 1,007, including 102 killed and 435 missing. Confederate casualties were reported to be 612, although Sheridan claimed a Union victory. Wittenberg stated that nothing about this battle could be called a victory, and that was
Union Station.
You got it. And it was a success. It did divert the attention away from the crossing at the James, so he gets some credit for that. Now we go to time for the USMA classes of 1861 in the Battle of Gettysburg. And we go a little bit beyond that because that class was somewhat special in terms of the Civil War. So here we go. There were two graduating classes for 1861 at the United States Military Academy at West Point. The May class was composed of 45 men who enrolled in the summer of 1856 and had completed a 5-year course of study. And the June class of 34 men who enrolled in the summer of 1857 and had completed a 4-year course of study. It should be noted that the course of study when the academy was established was 2 years. However, it was not the pending conflict that resulted in the two classes. Rather, it was a return to the 4-year course of study. With respect to the 5-year course of study, who was the superintendent who lengthened the course of study to 5 years, and who was the Secretary of War who approved it? Okay.
Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis.
You got it. Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Lee and Secretary of War Jefferson Davis. Interesting that they did it. Okay. Like I said, we see him before. He was born in New Jersey in what's now Sussex Borough.
Yeah.
Why did they do it? Do you know?
No, kill Patrick.
Yeah, that's Kilpatrick. Why they expanded to 5 years is that Davis thought that it was they needed more training, but what happened was there was a lot of revisions to the academy curriculum that Lee put in place. As soon as he left, the shall we say the faculty changed it back to what it was before. So unfortunately, they weren't up into modern changes. When Lee became president of Washington College, he improved their curriculum tremendously. Part covered in the Flood's book on the last years of Lee.
But do you think Lee was being played, that he was so smart and he was so special? I mean, the war was never really in doubt.
No, well, let's stick with the questions.
No. But again, at the end of here, we'll come up with another. There was a third class from 1861 that we'll get to.
All right.
Okay. Bear with me. Mine's 3. That's awful. Okay. Born in Zanesville, Ohio, he graduated 15th of 45 in the May class of 1861. Assigned to artillery, his service included First Bull Run, the Peninsula Campaign, Second Bull Run, Antietam, Fredericksburg, and Chancellorsville. He commanded an artillery battery at Gettysburg and was ordered by Major General G.K. Warren to move his battery to the top of Little Round Top. This was accomplished with the artillery crews, including its commanders, moving the artillery and caissons by hand. As he was bending over, mortally wounded Brigadier General Stephen Weed, he was fatally wounded. And that would be Charles Hazlitt. Born in Wisconsin, he graduated 12th out of 34 in the June class of 1861. Assigned to artillery, his service included Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville. At Gettysburg, he commanded an artillery battery positioned at the angle, just to the right of the copse of trees, the focal point of Pickett's charge on July 3rd. Although wounded twice in order to go to the rear, he stayed at his post, and he pulled the lanyard, setting off his cannon. He was fatally wounded. On November 14, 2014, 151 years after his death, he was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Obama.
Alonzo Cushing.
You got it.
Wow.
Yes. Okay. Here we go. Born in Michigan, he graduated 16th of 34 in the June class of 1861. His service included First Bull Run in Antietam, Fredericksburg, and Chancellorsville. At Gettysburg, his batteries were positioned at Ziegler's Grove and was involved in July 2nd charges by portion of Lieutenant General Warren's Corps, and on July 3rd, defending against Pickett's charge. He was mortally wounded just as the charge was repulsed and died the next day. This one's on a very well-known name, and his name is George Woodruff. Here's an interesting one. We've come across him before in the past. Born in Maine, he graduated 5th out of the 45 in the May class of 1861. Assigned to artillery, he fought at First Bull Run. Seriously wounded during the battle, he refused to leave his guns. For his heroic action at First Bull Run, he received the Medal of Honor. Reassigned to infantry, he was first colonel of the 20th Maine Volunteers and helped train the regiment as well as his. Yep. Second in command, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. At Fredericksburg, he led the 20th Maine in one of the last charges against Marie's Heights. At Chancellorsville, he was promoted to brigadier general, leading the brigade in the 11th Corps. At Gettysburg on July 1st, he assumed command of the division commanded by Brigadier General Francis Barlow, and Barlow fell wounded and was captured. He led it back to Cemetery Hill. On July 2nd, he was still in command of the division, which repulsed the charge of the Confederate troops commanded by Major General Jubal A. Early. After Gettysburg, he was transferred to the Department of the South, serving in South Carolina and Florida. He was transferred to the Army of the James under Major General Benjamin F. Butler, who later became his father-in-law. For his performance at the Second Battle of Fort Fisher, he was promoted to Major General of the Union Army and Brigadier General of the Regular Army. During the Reconstruction, he served as governor and senator of Mississippi. At the time of his death in 1933, at age 93, he was the last full-rank general who had served the Union.
Ames.
You got it. Adelbert Ames. Born in County Cavan, Ireland, he graduated first in 34 of the June class of 1861. Appointed to the Corps of Engineers, his battle experience included Blackburn's Ford, First Bull Run, where his horse shot and killed from under him. He helped design some of the fortifications around Washington, D.C. His battle service included the bombardment and siege of Fort Pulaski. He went back to home in Rochester, New York to get married. He was appointed colonel of the 140th New York Regiment, which was mostly composed of volunteers from the Rochester area and contained a good number of Irish American from that area. He led the regiment at Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. At Gettysburg on July 2nd, he was leading his regiment and ordered to follow his brigade Weeds as it headed to aid Sickles' Third Corps, which was heavily engaged. Mayor Governor K. Warren countermanded the orders given and ordered the 140th New York to the western face of Little Round Top. The regiment proceeded at the double quick over the top of the hill and down its front. As he approached the colors, he was fatally wounded. Some historians have noted that his and his regiment performance at Gettysburg was of equal importance as that of the 20th Maine. And if you go to Little Round Top, there is a bust of him, and the good luck though is to rub his nose. So the bronze statue has a very shiny nose usually.
Patrick O'Rourke.
Patty O'Rourke. This is the gimme on here. Born in Ohio, he was the best known of the men who graduated of the class of 1861. He graduated 34th and last in the June class of 1861. Assigned to the cavalry, he served in First Bull Run, Siege of Yorktown, Pincer Campaign, where he was an aide to General George B. McClellan. He later served at the Battle of South Mountain and Antietam. As part of the restructuring of the cavalry under Major General Alfred Pleasant, he was promoted to Brevet Brigadier General at Gettysburg on July 1st. His brigade was trying to locate Confederate cavalry and was advised that Lee's army had been located at Gettysburg. On July 2nd, his brigade was engaged by Lieutenant Richard Ewell's Confederate Second Corps. On July 3rd, he led a series of cavalry charges, which prevented the Confederate cavalry from succeeding in its mission attacking the Union rear. After
Custer.
Gettysburg, yeah, that's George Armstrong Custer. Only got a few more. Okay. Born in Virginia, he would have been a member of the May 1861 class had he not resigned from the academy on April 22nd, 1861.
You didn't advance the slide.
Oh, I passed someone wrong. Uh-oh. Nope, forgot to do. Yep, there we go. He would have been a member had he not resigned from the academy. Oh, bear with me. Yeah, my screen is cut off a little bit, so I have to use the written text. So there we go again. Had he not resigned from the academy on April 22nd, 1861, 2 weeks before graduation. At West Point, he had a famous roommate, George Armstrong Custer. He joined the famed Washington Artillery of New Orleans, commissioned a first lieutenant. He participated in First Bull Run, or Manassas as they call it, He was noted for shooting down observation balloons. Promoted to colonel in the 5th Virginia Cavalry, he participated in 2nd Bull Run, South Mountain, and Antietam. At Gettysburg, he and his regiment fought on East Cavalry Field. He was seriously wounded several times. Eventually promoted to Major General, he commanded a cavalry division during the siege of Petersburg. In 1898, he was one of 4 former Confederate generals appointed brigadier generals in the United States.
General Wheeler.
Yeah, Joe Wheeler.
Close, right church, wrong pew. It was Thomas Rosser.
Wow.
Okay, here we go. Born in New York State, near Batavia, he graduated 40th out of 45 in the class of May 1861. Although he was at Gettysburg, he was part of Sedgwick's 6th Corps, which was held in reserve during the battle after a one-day march that covered 35 miles. He achieved fame at the Battle of Spotsylvania using an attack plan that he developed, leading a force of 5,000 handpicked men that breached the Confederate lines. However, due to delays involving supporting troops, the position could be not maintained. Subsequent attacks were fruitless.
Emory Upton.
You got it. There he is.
Henry, have you ever thought of also adding a point of wisdom that it doesn't matter what a lot of West Pointers, like Lee was first in his class, turned into a traitor.
Yeah, let him do his, wait.
No, but have you ever thought of adding each time you do it, what is a lesson that cuts across the people as individuals to war in general?
Let him ask his questions, please. Let him ask his questions.
Okay. Anyway, here we go. He graduated 19th out of 34 cadets in the June 1861 class. He spent most of his service during the war in the Corps of Engineers. He was cited for meritorious service at Vicksburg. His claim to fame is he is the only Civil War officer to serve on active duty during World War I. Yeah, this one I thought would be a tough one. His name was Major General Peter Conover Haynes, and he served as served as in the engineers over the port of Baltimore, I think, in World War I. As noted previously, the May and June 1861 classes were graduated on schedule due to a change back to the 4-year course of study. One additional class, which entered the academy in June 1858, was accelerated and also graduated in June 1861. It was able to claim the following, which no other class year since 1824 could claim. And that claim was, no member of this class served in the Confederate military. And let's take a look at these. As you can see, sorry, this would be a better picture, but you'll notice the one thing, except for Rosser, there was 3 things a cadet at West Point could not have. He could have no wife, no horse, and no mustache. And as you can see, they didn't. And then on the that's Cadet Albert Ames, and that's Alonzo Cushing, and that's Ames as Major General, and that's Cushing, as a lieutenant. And then here is First Lieutenant Peter C. Ames, and that's Major General Ames in his World War I uniform. Okay, then we're in potpourri. All right, here we go. This Union general was described as a splendid piece of machinery with all the screws a little loose.
Sherman.
You got it. I found that in 2 different books. Educated as a lawyer, he served the Alabama Volunteers in Mexico. And sometimes my proofreading is off. War. An enthusiastic champion of the Confederate cause and of slavery, he helped organize the 20th Alabama Regiment. Some of the engagements he was involved in were Murfreesboro, Stone River, Fort Gibson, and Missionary Ridge. During the Atlanta campaign, he served in the Army of Tennessee, Hood's Corps, Stevenson Division, commanding the 20th, 23rd, 30th, 31st, and 46th Alabama regiments. After the war, he returned to Alabama and returned his practice of law. In 1940, his name was added to a structure in Selma, Alabama, that became an icon for the civil rights struggle in the United States.
Pettis.
Yep. Brigadier General Edmund Pettis. All right, now we're getting to the in 1898, President William McKinley appointed 4 Confederate generals and Major Generals of Volunteers for service in the Spanish-American War. We've seen two of them, Rosser and Wheeler. Right, the other
Fitzhugh
two-
Lee.
Yep, Fitzhugh Lee, and there was one other. And Matthew C. Butler. Not a well-known name, but again, thought that was interesting. Class of 1846 had many famous Civil War generals. George V. McClellan ranked second. Darius Couch ranked 13th. Thomas Stonewall Jackson ranked 17th. Jesse Reno ranked 18th. George Stoneman ranked 33rd. Cadmus Wilcox ranked 54th, and others. George Pickett was ranked 59th, which was last in this class. These two well-known Civil War generals, one from each army, entered the academy as part of class of 1846, but due to illness and deficient academic performance, were reassigned and graduated as part of the class of 1847. All right. Well, here they come. John Gibbon and Ambrose Powell Hill. Can you imagine what that class would have been with those two guys in it?